Welcome everyone to I would say a very special lockdown edition, but we seem to have had quite a few lockdown editions already. Liberal Democrats live stream, and we've got a fantastic little session for you today with three very special and very well-known members of the party. David Limbrick MP, our member in Southeast Metro here in Melbourne, who's become a bit of a media darling superstar at the moment. We have Dr. John Humphreys, our one of the founders of the party, who's back to being our national president again after the latest AGM. And of course, Mr. David Leyonhjelm, our former senator in New South Wales. We're all here obviously today to discuss a lot more of the lockdown issues and what the Liberal Democrats will do in terms of opening up and what our plans would be for that. And we also hope that you've seen the launch of our new petition in regards to basically our new motto essentially of being freedom over fear. We want to be able to have that more of our freedom, and that's our petition there, and we'll speak more about that later. So make sure you get all your questions in the chat box there on the live stream, and then we'll get to some of those questions towards the end. So I launched to all three of you. Welcome. We've got obviously Dr. Humphreys is in lockdown, he's not doing in Biden, he's not wearing his mask inside. How's it going up there, John? Getting a little bit of a taste of Melbourne up there in lockdown?
Yes, I think David Limbrick was quite enjoying getting his revenge when he asked us all recently if we were stuck in lockdown. Thankfully, I try to avoid turning on the TV and try to avoid watching the mainstream media. So I know about this rather late. And it's only when I go outside and see everyone else wearing masks that I realize that they've done it to us again. So I managed to mostly avoid having to change most of my life. But yes, it is somewhat frustrating to be back in it again, and just in time to ruin the second birthday of my son. So he now goes without a birthday party because we need another day's lockdown.
So and David Leyonhjelm, how are you out there? You're in the bush, so you're kind of okay, aren't you, out there on the property?
Yes, we're at our alternative residence, which is allowed when we are at our other residence in Sydney. We're basically housebound and you're allowed to go shopping. But and I have to say, they have written the public health orders in a more sensible fashion than Victoria's. You don't have to wear a mask outside in New South Wales at all. You do have to wear a mask inside, which is equally stupid, but not as stupid as wearing it outside. And they've written the public health orders in an interesting way that can be open to interpretation. So, for example, you're allowed to exercise outside, but you're also allowed to engage in what's called outdoor recreation. Nobody's quite sure what that means. And certainly the police don't. And I think that disappoints the police because they're like the Victorian police. They're rather fond of people mashing their faces into the ground and handcuffing them and throwing them into a police van. And then later on, of course, letting them go and not charging them. And when they do that, and the victim claims outdoor recreation, of course, there's occasionally cases where the police have to pay the individual's costs. So it's an interesting situation to be in at the moment.
And David Limbrick, what are your thoughts so far? Obviously, you've been getting a lot of people calling in and emailing in and calling into your office as well. What are your thoughts in how now Queensland's government is reacting to all of this lockdown?
Look, I think you can see quite clearly that a lot of the state governments are sort of, acting together in many ways or acting in similar ways. Everyone was thinking that Victoria was unique in the way that we were so harsh in our lockdowns, but it's looking like, other states are doing it. And Victoria's not locked down at the moment, although we still have some severe restrictions. I think all of the state governments are making similar errors to what I think the Victorian government has made, in that they're focusing very narrowly on these performance indicators and ignoring all of the costs and the harms that they're doing, or maybe not ignoring it, but not really understanding it very well. They're just focusing on number of cases, number of transmissions and this sort of thing. And I think it's very, very dangerous when you give these public health officials, massive power with very narrow objectives, a lot of harms get caused that they wouldn't have intended, but nonetheless still happen.
Interesting. You mentioned the KPIs there. It's interesting to note when this started, the metric people were following was deaths, and then it was hospitalizations, and now it's simply cases with no actual visible health effects on the person is enough to send the country into spasms of insanity. So it's interesting how the metric of their KPI has been changing over time as well. And on another point, correct me if I'm wrong here, but in terms of Queensland, of course, our reaction in this state's been crazy, but correct me if I'm wrong, didn't South Australia go into lockdown with a total of 0 cases?
So did Alice Springs. Alice Springs locked down because they might get a case. Now, John, I know you've also done a fair bit of research, and obviously being an economist yourself, about the cost of lockdown and the cost of COVID itself and some of those unintended consequences. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
You're accusing me of being an economist. That's just not polite, Kirsty. You know, we're supposed to be having a friendly chat here. Yeah, look, I think we'll probably end up waxing lyrical here about lots of costs of lockdown. But I think before we dive into that, I'd like to ask the two Davids. I might have to, I know it sounds a bit awkward and rude, I might have to refer to you by your surnames, given that you're both called David. But I'd like to throw to the two Davids about a kind of an assessment about how governments have reacted for the last 18 months. It seems to me that the reaction has been more political than based on maximizing the welfare of the people living in this country. But it does seem that their actions have been politically successful, unfortunately. I don't know who wants to take that first. David Leyonhjelm, if your internet holds up a little longer, do you want to, what's your take or your read on the political reaction over the last 18 months?
Yeah, well, to be honest, it's hard to find something positive to say. It has all been downhill in political terms. What have we seen? The trashing of our constitution. There's supposed to be free trade between the states, free movement between the states. There are 2 clauses in the constitution that are intended to ensure that the lockdowns, the state border closures, don't occur. And yet there was a half-baked challenge to that taken to the High Court. The High Court found on fairly narrow grounds that challenge was invalid. There has been no subsequent, and the Commonwealth Government withdrew from that challenge as well, which is sort of characteristic of how the Commonwealth Government has behaved all the way through this, total lack of courage. Hasn't stood up to the states and acted in the best interest of the country at all. It's all been about politics. All the way it's been politics. And as a consequence of that, the states feel that they are well within their legal rights to bang up state barriers anytime they feel like it. And they do it for political reasons, and it's been successful. We saw the Queensland government re-elected very healthily, and of course there's an absolute landslide election in Western Australia based on closing the border. It's very, very disheartening. We've also seen this mob mentality, which has manifested itself as, you're saving lives or you're killing grandma. This political narrative that has developed. So if you're not wearing a mask, you want grandma to die. You're not wearing a mask, you're putting other people in danger. And that entitles then all sorts of retribution, including what I thought I would never see in Australia is complete police brutality. Dreadful brutality in Victoria and New South Wales at times for the same thing, for not wearing a mask, for being on a beach. There's a famous case of the guy who hangs out at Bondi Beach all the time, the bodybuilder. It took 3 coppers, I think, to jump on him because he went on to Bondi Beach, and they decided it was if you went on to Bondi Beach, you would kill grandma. So they thought that was okay to jump on him and arrest him. The upshot of that, though, was that they ultimately dropped all charges and they paid that guy's costs. But there have been a lot of people who weren't so fortunate, who got their faces mashed into the ground. There was no camera around to record it. And of course, the police story was believed when it got to court. And of course, not a lot of people are prepared to take it to court, which is unfortunate. We've seen lockdowns used as the first resort rather than the last resort. Not even the Chinese did that. In Australia here, we think it's acceptable. Masks have become symbols of oppression instead of, their scientific basis is very thin indeed. And yet there have been signs that, well, if you don't wear a mask, you're essentially just a criminal.
And David Limbrick, sorry.
There have been many other examples of where the politics have ruled the science, not only in masks. And that's really quite depressing. And I wonder, are we going to get our country back? The country that we thought we had, larrikins, free thinking, scant respect for authority, although concern for other people. Are we ever going to see that back again? And at the moment, I struggle to be optimistic about
that. David Limbrick, what are your thoughts there, or what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think the original rationale that we heard from governments was actually quite reasonable. They said, buy us a bit of time so we can flatten the curve so that the health system doesn't get overwhelmed. And I think most people were, okay, that sort of makes sense, right? You need a bit of time to prepare for this. No one wants the health system overwhelmed with cases, and buy a bit of time. But then that sort of whole rationale disappeared. And then we've gone into this sort of, COVID suppression strategy, and all those ICU beds that they put in preparation, and ventilators and all that never got used. They're all just sitting there. And we've been in this long-term trying to just smash the disease down to zero COVID, and have turned ourselves into this hermit kingdom. And in the process, we've trampled on all the human rights of Victorians and Australians. And in some ways it's obvious, you get your freedom of movement and freedom of association and freedom of assembly limited, but there's also much more insidious ways that people's rights have been attacked. And one of those examples, which I've spoken a lot about and which concerns me greatly, is mask wearing. Now, the people who are pushing the mask, they say, no, it's no big deal. You just wear a mask and whatever, and, stop your whinging and just do what you're told. But in reality, there's a lot of people who can't wear masks. So people who have lung conditions, for example, people who are victims of trauma, including, assault and sexual assault. And this is quite a common reason that people can't wear a mask. There's a range of other conditions where these people can't wear masks. And so what it's ended up happening is that these people are getting discriminated against. I've heard stories about people being refused medical service. They've been refused entry to a pharmacist. They've been refused entry to the supermarket. They've been yelled at and spat on or spat at by people in the street. And considering that the nature of the reason why these people have mask exemptions, victims of trauma and sexual assault, this is an absolutely horrific unintended consequence. And I've brought this up with the government many times, and they're finally trying to, take action to do something about this. But really, I think the only way that they can fix it is to make it voluntary, which is what I've argued from right at the start. I've said we should do it like what Japan's done. Japan didn't have any mandates at all. They focused on, they said, yes, wearing masks is a good idea. And they put out these great educational videos on what a mask does, what it doesn't do, what it's good for, what situations you should use it in. And, please take responsible decisions. And if someone chooses not to wear a mask, please respect their choice. And they did that in Japan because it wasn't mandatory. There's no such thing as an anti-masker when something's not mandatory. And there's no fines or anything like that. And the vast majority of people followed those directions because they understood the science and the reasoning behind it. And this is what happens when we've got government overruling individual risk decisions by people and businesses and taking on those risk decisions themselves. People become disempowered. They can't learn to think for themselves, which is what's absolutely essential in a free society.
Yeah, that point on risk, I think, is crucial. I think we'd probably all agree that what's happened eventually is the politics has been overtaken by politics, right? So a lot of these decisions have been obviously political in that whichever party in whichever state rushes to be the most draconian seems to get re-elected, which is very depressing, as Leyonhjelm says.
It's a bit different in Victoria at the moment. The government's hurting because of these. I think we're
we can hope so. I mean,
the recent polls have been showing that there's a fair bit of backlash after lockdown 4.
The thing that worries me about the way the policy has been justified, if not its actual rationale, is this total lack of realistic risk assessment. The policy seems to be set by people who think that all risk needs to be abolished, and you can't live life that way. The government, and therefore all the people listening to the government, are breathing in this attitude of risk needs to be abolished, which is just insane, patently insane once you say it aloud. Life is risk. There's nothing you can do without risk. But it seems to me that people's attitudes to risk are being really warped, and the political attitude to risk has been really warped over this last 18 months. And it worries me because how easily does that bounce back?
This is a great point, John. And this is not a new way of thinking. Like, these public health types of and the government bureaucrat types have always been like this about risk. Like in Victoria, we have this road toll strategy, and they call it towards zero. And the idea is to reduce the road toll to zero. Now, I know that you guys have discussed this before, but the idea that you can reduce the road toll to zero, well, of course you can do that tomorrow. Just set the speed limits to 10 kilometres an hour and it'll get pretty close to zero, I would imagine. But of course, it's not taking into account all of the harm caused by taking away that ability for people to take risk, right? Because, you know, transport's really important and logistics are important. And it's the same with all these restrictions that they're doing with COVID. You know, with the towards zero stuff, yes, it's minor inconveniences and that because, you know, they've got lower speed limits than might be desirable. But when you put it in terms of public health and gives them such massive powers, it becomes really dangerous what they're doing.
Yes, that's absolutely right. You see it, I totally agree with you. You see it in all sorts of ways. And the catch cry is if it saves just one life, as if any cost is worth paying if it saves just one life. And of course, that's not true. None of us actually agree with that, unless it's our life, of course. And so we tend to recognise in some cases that a certain amount of risk is okay. But when it's come to COVID, there has been a lot of people, the noisy ones, the ones who have influenced the government, probably the focus groups that the governments have done, have been extremely risk averse. And it's illogical. It is illogical. And we're seeing it again in the cases of therapies for COVID. So the antagonistic attitude to hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, or any of the other possible therapies, there has been a blanket no, we're not going to have any of those, despite the fact that there is probably, the evidence probably suggests that they could be helpful as therapeutics. We're seeing it again. We saw it also with the vaccines in that we were slower to approve them in other countries, although that's a mixed blessing because some people take reassurance from that. But nonetheless, it is a manifestation of our risk mentality in this country. We are not risk takers in this country. This COVID episode exercise has demonstrated that well and truly. We are a lucky country with a very mediocre leadership, and I have to say the majority of my fellow Australians are not much better.
Just one last comment on this before going back to what the question Kirsty asked me and I dodged 10 minutes ago. But one of the consequences, I think, from this warped risk assessment that we're seeing in this country and in our politics has been then the lack of proportionality in the response. And Limbrick, I think you've talked about this quite a lot over the last 12 months, that if they want to do something, what they do should be proportionate to the risk. And it's hard to be proportionate to the risk when you're an irrational Cassandra about the risk. But so would you like to talk at all about this issue of proportionality?
Yeah, so this is something that I've spoken many, many times about. And in fact, it's the law. So the emergency powers that they're using in Victoria is the Public Health and Wellbeing Act. And two of the principles that they need to abide by when they're making directions is they have to be necessary, they have to be proportionate, they have to be time bound, and they have to be the least restrictive of rights. And the way that they check rights in Victoria, we have a Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities. and they need to do what's called a charter assessment. Now, the issue I've got is that the underlying health evidence that they're using to make these decisions and the human rights charter assessments have not been released. And I've been going on about this for over a year now. They haven't released any of this stuff. And look, I think maybe because they've got a get out clause in the legislation, which means that they can just rely on the precautionary principle if they don't have real evidence of proportionality. And I suspect that most of these directions, they're actually just relying on the precautionary principle that would enable them to legally do it. But I don't think many people would be happy finding out that really there's not a lot of science behind all this. A lot of it's just guesswork. And similarly, the human rights charter assessments, I think the idea that we've got a couple of dozen cases in Victoria, in Melbourne, this is like when we had lockdown 4, we had a couple of dozen cases in Melbourne and they locked down Mildura and Wodonga. No one with a straight face can say that's the least restrictive of rights of Victorians. Like, it's just nuts. Like, no one can argue that, I don't think. And
John, can we go back to some of those costs again? Can we get back to the costs of COVID, John? Because I think you're probably one of the best to talk about that here. And it's not spoken about in the media.
I don't know if I am one of the best, but yes, mea culpa for sidetracking your last question onto that. I just wanted to get that discussion of risk assessment done in politics over the last year. But no, I think the discussion we've had there leads quite nicely into this next issue of there's been bad risk assessment and bad politics involved. But there's also been, I think, an underappreciation of the costs of lockdown. And I think you're throwing to me because you made the outrageous slur that I'm an economist. But I would suggest that perhaps some of the most important costs and the underappreciated costs aren't necessarily what people consider traditional economic costs. So yeah, obviously shutting down business has been terrible to small business. It's been pretty good for big business. And all of the people who used to care about inequality seem to be strangely silent about that dichotomy in treatment between big and small business. It's been quite difficult on hospitality industry in particular, because a lot of the way that the JobKeeper program worked, it really didn't help as much if you had lots of casual or foreign employees, which a lot of hospitality businesses do. So hospitality small businesses have been really struggling for the last 12, 15 months. And this is a bit of a segue on that. But interestingly, just in the last couple of months, the ATO, the government's tax office, has started knocking on the door of these small businesses, these small hospitality businesses, and leaning on them to pay outrageous sums of back taxes that are just impossible to pay. So that really is a bit of an outrage, this little sidetrack, and maybe it's a bit of a sidetrack for today's discussion, but I will be back to speak to people about that at some stage. But that just shows the costs that this is imposed on a lot of small businesses, which adds up, which a lot of people dismiss it as, oh, that's an economic cost. But an economic cost is about people's livelihoods. It's about the quality of their life. And we don't only care about the quantity of our life. We also care about the quality of our life. And if you take away people's jobs, if you take away people's businesses that they spent decades of their life working for, you haven't just mildly inconvenienced them or cut their wage. You've taken away a big part of the driving purpose for the last years or decades of their life, which is a significant cost. It's not just, it shouldn't be dismissed with a wave of the hand saying, oh, that's just an economic cost. It is a personal cost. It's a real cost to real people. But having said that, I would suggest that some of the biggest costs that have come from these lockdowns have been stuff that's harder to measure according to traditional economic ways, such as lost years of education. I mentioned before, it's a small story, but my son can't have his birthday party. But that story is replicated again and again around the world with a lot of people and a lot of kids. And these kids are basically at no risk of COVID. And we're sacrificing a lot of years of happiness of our kids' lives for the policy response, which, as we've discussed before, has been out of proportion with the realistic risk. And there's other health costs from the lockdown. The number of people that haven't gone to see a doctor because of the COVID situation. It's often referred to as an example that's often referred to is the number of people who haven't gone for cancer screenings. You guys may know this, but cancer deaths in Australia are running above average for this year and for the last roughly 6 to 12 months. So that's worrying. Diabetes deaths are running above average now in Australia. So there's lots of these little costs that can be hard to put a traditional economic dollar value on, but they're very real. And I think some of these costs, and this is how I'll pass over to Limbrick. Some of these costs are best shown through anecdotes of stories of people's lives. And I think, David, if I'm not wrong, you've been inundated with stories of people sharing their pain and their suffering in these lockdowns.
Yeah, it's been absolutely horrific. Look, the things that concern me the most are what's happened to children. Locking them up like this just seems absolutely unconscionable to me, that the children were never at risk of serious harm from COVID. The reason that we've locked them up, and I asked about this many times with the government, and they've confirmed this, is to stop movement within the community. So we've essentially sacrificed the welfare of children to protect everyone else, which I can't think of any other situation throughout history. Maybe you guys are more have a better knowledge of history than I do, but there's not many societies throughout history that would sacrifice their children's welfare in this way. And the harm is like horrific. Like in Victoria, we've had children locked up for most of their school year. Now, I've got 3 boys of my own. One of them, it was his first year of high school. You imagine that, your first year of high school, you're going to meet new people, you're trying to learn the ropes of a new school, all these people that you don't know, that you've got to form relationships with, and you're doing it all from Zoom. Like, it's just nuts. And other kids, their final year in primary school or high school, they can't take their exams, they don't have their DEB, they can't meet their friends. And the mental health impacts on kids from this, I've just got such worries about how this is going to play out in the future. I mean, there was an article recently in the newspaper, they were talking about, suicidal ideation in Victoria, and it was like, they said it was a shocking figure. It was like 1 in 10 people have during lockdown had some form of suicidal ideation. And you're right, like when I spoke to Professor Gigi Foster about costs, and she did some sort of back of the envelope costs projections on, what are the different harms? And she went through some of the harms that you talked about, delaying treatments and not getting checkups and that sort of thing. But she said by a mile, the biggest long-term cost will be mental health costs. And we still have really no idea about it, other than all of the indicators, as I've seen through the estimates process, all of the indicators for mental health are off the charts. Like, and you just see the way that people are reacting. Like, there's so many people, sad people now, and they call my office and stuff, and it's really horrible. And I don't know, and I don't think anyone really knows how much harm they've really done.
Well, you mentioned Gigi Foster. Her and also Professor Paul Fridas have done some good benefit cost analysis on this, which firstly just highlights the lack of serious benefit cost analysis coming out of the government. I mean, anytime this is raised, the answer is just to dodge it, as if serious, thoughtful consideration of the issue is somehow immoral. The only moral thing to do is a knee-jerk overreaction to misattributed, badly assessed risk, which is a crazy approach. But if you take the time to check these benefit cost analysis, and Gigi did a good start and Paul Fridas has done good work, it gets a bit too esoteric for me to dive into now. I'll do another economic live stream another time. But it is possible to look at the trade-offs of quality of life. There's a metric called the quality adjusted life year. And there has been a massive decrease in this quality adjusted life year, which is, as I said before, people don't only care about the quantity of life, the quality of life matters too. Most people would accept for their life to be twice as good while they're alive and die 1 year earlier, for example. That's just a random example. But most people would accept those sorts of trade-offs. And what we've done is kind of the reverse. We've, in a desperate hope of extending some people's lives by an average of 2 or 3 years, by the way, that's the potential upside, we've significantly decreased the quality of life of a lot of people. The reported happiness, well-being is through the floor. The mental health problems are significantly spiking, as you mentioned. And it is nearly impossible to add this up honestly and come to a situation where the lockdowns have made sense.
Yeah. Well, we've got that bit of a pause there. Sorry, I just want to remind people as well to get your questions in the chat box there. Otherwise, these three will talk all day. But just put some questions in there as well. I'm scrolling as we're going. I'm getting a lot of comments in there, but let's get some questions as well. Sorry, David Leyonhjelm.
Yeah, so I'm not an economist, so I'm going to make an economics comment, as you would expect. I think John's very very neatly summed up the human cost of this and put it into context. But there is a massive economic cost as a result of what's been done to us. For starters, yes, my internet is satellite-based, so it's a bit shaky, so I apologise for the audio. We did, in 2019, we had, I think it's 9 million international tourists. And so last year and this year, we will have 0 for all intents and purposes. That's businesses that used to house those tourists, show them around, provide them food and drink, entertain them, all sorts of things for 9 million people who are no longer coming to Australia. So when you see newspaper articles that say, well, we're back to where we were pre-COVID, you know, unemployment's back to where it was pre-COVID, you know, economic growth is looking good. Just remind yourself that it's bullshit, because just one example is 9 million foreign tourists. Then there are 700,000 foreign students who used to come to Australia who are no longer here, or most of them are no longer here. They've gone home. A few of them stayed over, but there's no new ones coming. Now, you could argue the universities were dining out on that too much with so many foreign students, but still in all, the economic cost of 700,000 students coming to Australia, paying fees, somewhere to stay, eating and drinking, entertaining, all that sort of stuff, no longer happening at all. And then there are 3 things really. I'm not an economist, so I have to keep it simple. When I was in Parliament, I used to think, okay, there's 3 things I've got to really watch out for. And they are the 3 areas where Australia has a natural advantage: agriculture, mining, and tourism. So agriculture has not suffered too bad, and thankfully that's my industry now, hasn't suffered too bad. There's been difficulties with exporting and importing some commodities, but overall not too bad. But mining, look at what the border lockdowns have done to getting staff into the mines in Western Australia, for example. It's been a major hindrance to them, to their economic activities. And then, of course, there's tourism, as I just mentioned. No foreign tourists. And they're trying to pretend that they can make up for it with domestic tourism, that we'll all go and have a holiday in the Kimberleys or something like that. And then they go and close the borders, so we can't anyway. I think I'm up to about 8 trips now that have been cancelled as a consequence of either international or domestic borders being closed. And then you'll read in the paper, oh no, the economy's back to where it was before COVID. Absolute bullshit.
A quick comment on the economics there, and I don't want to let my commenting on economics take away from my previous point. I think a lot of these social and mental health points are probably deservedly the focus. But on the economics, the fact that we're back to where we were 2 years ago, that's not the right metric. It's where would we have been otherwise? So if we're back where we were 2 years ago, that's 2 years of no growth. We don't normally have that. So that's still a cost. So there's still an economic cost there. And more to the point, on the economic front, we haven't finished paying the costs. I mean, that the massive spike in debt that we've run up, the potential consequences from the government's changed attitudes to budgets, deficits, and debt as far as the eye can see. I mean, that's probably a different live stream and a different chat, but these are significant problems we're passing on to the next generation. So there are ongoing economic costs. We've touched on economic costs and on the social costs. There's another category that's discussed less, although Limbrick, to his credit, talks about the human rights element quite a bit, I think. But that is the just lost liberties, for instance. I don't think Gigi was able to capture that in her benefit cost analysis, because how do you? But it does matter. Liberties matter. And also, and this one's even harder to capture, but the change of attitude that government has, they now have discovered that if they play a strong enough fear campaign and raise enough panic, they can get away with a lot of stuff that I think a lot of Australians didn't think would happen in our country. And now that politicians know they can so easily get that power, is our strategy really just to sit back and rest on the wisdom and benevolence of all future politicians? Because that seems like a scary approach. I mean, I think we should be genuinely worried just about the taste of excess power now in the mouths of a lot of these state premiers and federal politicians, for that matter. So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on this sort of political costs.
that's exactly why we brought in a private members bill recently, Tim Quilty and I, to reform the emergency powers effectively. And the major things that was intended to do was to provide accountability in the form of criminal penalties. So they would still have the emergency powers, but if they used the emergency powers to come up with a health direction that was not proportionate or the least restrictive of rights, then that would become a criminal offence. And I think that would make them think very carefully before coming up with these sort of things. They'd have to be 100% confident. Now, if they were 100% confident that it wasn't the least restrictive and it was proportionate response, then they would have nothing to fear from making these directions. So that was one of our big problems. And the other thing was to allow Parliament to disallow particular directions so that you're not totally handing over control to the public health bureaucrats. So that's another thing that the bill is intended to do. Hasn't actually failed yet. It's gone through past second reading, believe it or not. So we might be seeing more of that bill. We'll see what happens. But yeah, it's a big issue. I fear for the precedent that's been set here.
Now, obviously, I also want to just butt in and remind everybody watching, if you're not already a member, to sign up as a member of the party. ldp.org.au is the website address. Obviously, the more voices that we have, the louder we can be, is sort of what I've been saying a little bit lately, because we've got obviously election campaigns coming up. We need more of our members. We need boots on the ground. We need volunteers. We need all of that. We need core flutes. So if you haven't already signed up as a member, please do get on the website as soon as you can. That'd be great. Now, Freedom Day and this petition again. John, would you like to talk a bit more about why you brought in the petition and about Freedom Day itself? He's on mute.
Apologies, I muted myself, just to save you all from having to hear any more of me. Yeah, so as I think you mentioned at the beginning, we are running a petition now. You can find that at the same website, ldp.org.au, but there'll also be links in this live stream or links anywhere near where you're watching us right now, showing you where the petition is. Please sign, please share. Let's try and get as many voices involved in this as possible. Try and show your neighbours and politicians that there is a growing voice and a growing need to end the lockdowns, open the country, and as you say, my favourite catch cry, freedom over fear. So please have a look at that petition and share it. One of the things we call for in that petition, and it really goes to, so far we've been discussing the bad political reactions that we've seen over the last 18 months. And we've been discussing the underappreciated costs of lockdown. This has been a bit backward looking, but to switch this conversation into forward looking of what comes next, because we don't have a time machine. So as much as we can lament the mistakes of the past, without a time machine, all we can do is look forward and what we've got in front of us. And this is why we're trying to draw attention and draw focus to the idea of let's draw a line. I mean, the vaccine is rolling out now. People can take their risks, choose their own level of risk, and we can start opening up the country. And so that's what we're calling on. Basically, at this point in time, we're trying to call on as much of the public to say this as loudly as they can so that their neighbors and their friends and their families start hearing this carrying cry, this call. Because we think this is a call that is gaining support, and it should be gaining support, and I think it will over the coming 6 months. But we've gone a bit further, and we've also, I think David Limbrick has suggested a date, which I think you've now coined as Freedom Day, which is a nicer term as any, but maybe I should pass on to David to chat about the date that you've set.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things missing from all of these discussions, like the government, I know it's the federal government today talked about, their plan out of this. But one of the things that I think is absolutely critical is to have a deadline for all of these powers, because if we don't set a deadline, the public health bureaucrats will never, ever hand back power to us. So I think we need to set a deadline. I've said that should be December 4th. I think the most pushback I've had on that has been from people that think it should be sooner. But I think, if we're talking realistically, that aligns with the end of the state of emergency powers. Also, choice works both ways. We want people to be able to choose not to have a vaccine if they want, but also those that choose to have a vaccine will need sufficient time to be able to do that. I think that's reasonable to allow them to do that and go through all that process, but that's going to take some time. So I think there's a couple of reasons, but also part of this, as John said, is about influencing people, right? There's not enough people that agree with this idea of a deadline at the moment, but I think that we're going to need time to spread that idea. And this is what it's all about, giving us a bit of time so that we can prepare our systems. People who want to choose to take the vaccine have time to do it. Those that don't want to, that's cool too. But we want to spread this idea, and yeah, please share the idea with your friends. Like when people say, this should end, you ask them, when do you think it should end? I think it should end on December 4th. I think having a deadline is very important, and it'll also make it very crystal clear that, this thing about, people saying, well, I don't need a vaccine at the moment because, there's no COVID in Australia and I choose not to, or whatever. Well, it'll become, very clear to people once they get to that date, you've got the choice, make your own decisions. There's no you can't delay past the deadline.
And I think going from that, I might ask all three of you just quickly, before we get through hopefully a couple of questions, don't forget to put them in there. So now that we've seen all these problems, the thing is now should we do next, and what should the government do if they were actually going to listen to Liberal Democrats? Obviously, we are a very minor party and we don't have our wonderful senator anymore. But in an ideal world, and let's just go one by one, and I'll start with you, David Leyonhjelm. What would we do if we were in power as the Liberal Democrats?
Yes, well, I think the original idea was to not overwhelm the ICU system or the hospital system with cases, protect the most vulnerable, and those most vulnerable are people my age and older, or maybe a little bit younger, if they have comorbidities. And so we should encourage all of those people to get fully vaccinated and take all the precautions that they think are appropriate, for their level of risk. And then as long as there's reasonable information to people, so yes, you can get COVID. Yes, you might have a small chance of becoming quite seriously ill, probably not. If that concerns you, you can have the option of a vaccination. If you're more concerned about the side effects of a vaccination than you are about COVID, then you have a free choice which one you're going to choose. But I mean, it's not all about COVID. As John put on before, it's about people and their lives and getting on with life. So we have to sort of take people into our confidence and say, make your mind up. You choose whatever you think is appropriate for your family, your life, your health. Leave everybody else alone. Let everybody else do their own thing and get on with life. So I would absolutely end the state lockdowns. If I was the Prime Minister, I would take the states straight to the High Court with a Commonwealth-initiated case to get the state lockdowns declared unconstitutional. The previous case wasn't well constructed. So I would immediately challenge them. I think the states would back down instantly that happened, and then try to get it onto a rational footing where, as John was saying before, balancing risk. I am a believer in vaccination. I've had one and I need to get the second one. I would encourage anyone who's concerned about COVID to get a vaccination. But if you're not, fine. Just don't mess with the lives of other people either.
In terms of to answer that question of what would happen next, I think we've kind of outlined it a little bit in that petition. And if you haven't done yet, go find it, sign it, share it. You may see a theme. And what we outlined there, I think that there's a few paragraphs in that, but one of the big takeaways is that we need to return to the old normal. So what we're calling for isn't just an end to lockdowns. We're not saying no more lockdowns. We certainly are saying that, but we're saying more than that. Open the borders. Let us leave this country. I mean, the fact that we can't leave the country is insane anyway, but allow us to leave and come back, right? Stop these 14-day quarantines. We need to pick a date to end all of these restrictions and go back to what I call the old normal, not this ridiculous discussion of a new normal where perhaps masks and checking in everywhere becomes a way of life. That should never become a way of life. That's something we're going through now. We're suffering through it now, and it needs to end as soon as possible. But, and this is the second point I'd stress, as soon as possible, but certainly this year. It must be done this year. One of the nice things about the 4th of December date is it's the first weekend of summer, and it gives people enough time to plan for Christmas. Let's make sure this country is open up and free again, or as free as it was, as free as it can be. Let's make sure that happens this year, so that people can start planning to start living their life again, not just existing and waiting in perpetual fear, but living their life again this year. Let's get it done.
Yep. And David Limbrick.
Yeah, look, I agree with all that. I think the biggest harm that's been caused in terms of, the way the government's dealt with this has been caused through their mandatory directions and the way that government has taken over risk management from individuals. I think long term, this is a really dangerous thing. And, if we were in government, what I would be focusing on is transferring that risk management back to individuals and businesses and organizations. So with masks, for example, I think the way that I've said this many times publicly, I think the way that Japan handled it is excellent. They put out really good information and advice and guidelines on, different types of masks and how you should use them and all this sort of thing. And they said, please make up your own mind about this on what you should do. And I think with businesses running COVID plans and stuff, I do think that the government has a role here, but I think the government's role should be in, getting the best scientific evidence and presenting it in a way that can be consumed by individuals and businesses to help form their own risk assessments, right? At the moment, people are just being nannied by the government and being told what to do, even if to them it doesn't make sense. And in a lot of cases, it really doesn't make sense. And I think that's a really bad thing. I think we need to transfer the risk management down to the lowest level, down to the individuals and businesses that have to make these decisions. And I think that's the way forward, is focusing on education and guidance and making things available, like medicines and vaccines and that sort of thing. And then people can make their choices.
Just one more comment on the idea of setting a date. David Limbrick mentioned before that by setting a date, we do create a discipline on people to, if you want the vaccine, hurry up, don't dawdle, don't wait. But at this time, once the date is set, you don't have to have a vaccine, but after that, it's enter at your own risk and, make your own risk assessment, hopefully without the fear merchants and the panic mongers on TV trying to drum up fear and panic, but you can make your own risk. So that's one set of discipline. But I think an even more important discipline is the discipline it puts on politicians and bureaucrats. They need to, we're giving them a date. If we give them this date and they attempt to stick to it, that means they have to get done whatever they're talking about getting done now. They can't dawdle, they can't wait, they can't keep us in this perpetual house arrest for another year or 2 years while they eventually work to a long-term plan. I think Scott Morrison has come out and said he has a long-term plan so that someday my grandkids might be able to walk free again. But there's no time limit on it. So we're just trusting in the benevolence and wisdom of politicians. So by setting a date, we create that discipline on politicians that they need to get what they need to get done now, as soon as possible.
Yep. Well, I totally agree. And I thank the three of you for our discussion. Obviously, I remind everyone again, sign up as a member, put your hand up to be a volunteer. We're going to be having campaigns running all over the country. Obviously sign our petition that is going around. I'm not seeing a hell of a lot of questions in this chat box. There's a lot of little comments, but a nice one from Victor talking about freedom itself, but make freedom normal again, which is quite nice, Victor. Thank you. Yeah, and as Brad says here, they're making the local milk bar man the QR code cop. So all of these little small businesses that are now having to police people checking on their QR codes and what have you as well. I think we've all seen, I think particularly here in Melbourne, because of the fact that we've had such long lockdowns, so many small businesses just gone. There's just empty buildings all over the place.
Well, I worry about how much people are getting used to that. I certainly hope that Australians remember that it's not supposed to be normal, that you need to check in with the government to tell them every place you visit. That should be scary. So I hope that isn't normalized, and that needs to go on Freedom Day, right? Whenever we set a date and unwind all of these regulations, all of it needs to go.
Exactly. And a question here from Scott, but if you want to describe again, John, where is the petition? Where is the petition? Where can people find it?
Well, it's on the website right now, so ldp.org.au, if you go there directly. It also should be, if no one has yet, please, someone listening to this, do it now. Post it immediately into the chat box. You'll be able to find links to it shared on Facebook, the Lib Dems Facebook and Lib Dems on Twitter.
Yep.
So that you should be able to find it from that information.
Yep, it is everywhere, and it is now just shared again in the chat on this live stream, so you'll be able to see it. Oh, it's shared 2 times.
And where it's going to be shared in the future is whoever asked the question, it's about to be shared on your Facebook page and on your Twitter handle. So everyone, get out there and share it.
That's right. Well, that was actually Independent Man, and I know he has quite a large following, so it'd be very wonderful if he would share that as well for us. Now, any last words, any final words? John, how are you going up there? Obviously, you've only got, what, a few more hours of your lockdown?
They've extended it another 24 hours.
Excellent.
They always do.
They always do, yes. They love it.
Gold Coast and Townsville got free, but where I live, no, we're still under the thumb. So,
Yes.
I mean, I've had a fun afternoon anyway, getting to chat with all you guys, but now I get back into house arrest after this.
Well, yes. Okay, well, I think we are well and truly done now. Thanks everyone for following in. We've had a nice little audience, obviously, and certainly if you do have any more questions, feel free to email in, or there's a contact point on the website as well if you've got any questions or concerns that you think that you'd like to talk about. And as I said again, sign up as a member, volunteer, sign the petition.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all.
Thank you, Davids.
Thanks, Davids and John.